Well, everybody, you are all very welcome to this webinar on responsible recruitment. I am Maria Jose Subiela. I am CEO at Impact, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you today alongside Ben Stock, who heads up our technical and quality team, and Durba, who I'm hoping has been able to join us now. I can't see it now. Anyways, who's Executive Director at Migration Dristi. We hope to have a quite practical session for you today on responsible recruitment. We are going to look into what keeps going wrong. We are going to discuss why this matters, and much more importantly, we are going to discuss how to go about it. So we hope to keep it very practical for you. And please, please, please share comments, share questions in the chat. We are going to be monitoring this. In terms of house rules, cameras off and muted for now. We are recording the webinar, but we are not going to be recording the Q&A, which will be under Chatham House rules. So we hope you can ask any questions that cross your mind. And as I said before, please do post questions in the chat, comments, etc. So we are Impact. We are a global employee-owned consultancy working on business, human rights, and labor rights. We work on diagnosing, we work on remediating, and we work on changes at scale. We were founded by Rosie Hart 27 years ago, so we have a lot of experience to share with you. We are very lucky to work with a broad range of organizations, from government to NGO to investors and employers. It is particularly useful for us when we are diagnosing human rights issues and finding solutions that we work at different stages of the same supply chains. So sometimes we work with the buyers, we work with the suppliers, we work with the subcontractors. This helps us understand where the industry is moving, identify ways to work together and overcome challenges. And we do a lot of work as well with investors to try to generate some change at scale in different systems. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to ask Ben now to share what is our experience of responsible recruitment.
Thanks, MJ, and hi everyone, and welcome to the session today. Thanks so much for joining. So we've been doing a lot of work in responsible recruitment, especially in the kind of forced labour space since 2019 in particular. And this is just an introductory slide to show some of the areas we've worked in responsible recruitment, and to highlight that this is really is a global problem. It's certainly not local to any one place. I'm going to briefly touch on what's then going wrong in responsible recruitment or in international recruitment before moving on to focus most of today's time on practical solutions that we'll get to in the second half. But a brief bit of background about what keeps going wrong. The demand for jobs and opportunities for exploitation relative to migrant workers, it's still there. There's a huge population from many countries who really need work and are desperate to find it and desperate to find higher paying jobs overseas. So migrant workers have a lot of vulnerabilities. And if we think about the ILO forced labor indicators, which I'll get up on screen on the next slide, all of these are at higher risk for migrant workers. Local law is still lacking on responsible recruitment all across the globe. So we need to rely on international law, which is so-called soft law. Social audits have historically not really been able to find issues to do with forced labour, and a lot of this relates to the vulnerability of the recruitment journey. Some progress is being made in that regard, though, and various social audit schemes are encompassing new ways to find forced labour, which is very positive signs. But as noted by the US Customs and Border Protection, who places withhold release orders, so these economic sanctions on companies due to forced labour, they're saying as they're currently administered, these are ineffective in identifying and reducing forced labour. Within forced labour, debt bondage, responsible recruitment is a very major part. So thinking about these 11 indicators of forced labour, All of them are at higher risk for migrant workers due to the various vulnerabilities they experience. However, we're going to focus a bit on debt bondage, retention of ID, deception, and intimidation and threats during the migrant worker journey. So firstly, debt bondage. This is the most common sort of indicator that we think about at Impact when we're thinking about the migrant worker journey and responsible recruitment. So debt bondage, we're talking about recruitment fees and related costs. The most helpful definition of this is the ILO's 2019 definition. So migrant workers are often charged exorbitant fees and costs throughout their migrant worker journey. Sometimes this is in their origin country, sometimes this is in their destination country as they're carrying on with work. It's not always that workers are taking out loans. Sometimes they take out loans with very high interest rates from local loan sharks. Other times they're actually selling land, they're selling assets, and so losing an opportunity to make profit from their assets that otherwise existed. But the important thing to remember is that this recruitment agency business is very profitable and it's often legal. So it exists in many worker origin countries. And I've got on the screen just a couple of graphs which highlight some of the recruitment corridors that we've been examining over the past 5 years. So on the left, we've got workers from Bangladesh, Nepal, etc., going into Qatar, paying very high fees, especially Bangladeshi workers. And on the right, we've got the destination country of Malaysia. As you see in both examples, Bangladeshi workers tend to pay the highest amounts in fees. So I then wanted to move on to this definition of recruitment fees that the ILO has got out. It's split into 3 parts. So very briefly, recruitment fees might be how a recruitment agency actually kind of gets its admin paid for. These are to do with the services around recruitment. Related costs might be things like travel, air ticket, medical, things like this. But this part C is really important to think about. So illegitimate, unreasonable, and undisclosed costs. So what we're talking about here is corruption, extortion, bribes, kickback payments. And this diagram that we made for the UK Home Office to look at it was to do with the migrant worker journey to Malaysia. However, this is applicable in very many other recruitment corridors around the world. All of these touch points highlight places where workers can be exploited and highlighted as well some opportunities for corruption as well. There's further opportunities for retention of ID during this migrant worker journey. So very often recruiters will hold workers' documentation at kind of an early or mid stage and not give it back to them until they come to the airport and pay all of their recruitment fees as well. So again, it's just another form of control. And within the ILO's definition, this is what they're talking about when they mention the term collaterals. In Indonesia as well, we're finding very often things like birth certificates, school certificates are held even when workers go to their destination country, and then they're spending months and months paying money back to the recruitment agency in arrears in order to get access to their collateral documents as well. Intimidation and threats is a critical indicator as well. So if we go back to that same graph we were looking at regarding migrant workers going into Qatar, you'll notice that the actual numbers of workers reporting fees on screen here is around 65% for Bangladeshis and 85% for Nepali workers. Actually, this was probably more like 100%. However, workers are very heavily coached and coerced into not actually revealing the fees they've paid or that they've paid fees. The recruitment agencies will be very hard on them, saying you're not allowed to tell anyone, you'll lose your job. Employers might often have zero fees policies, and so they know the recruitment agencies will get in trouble. Workers don't want to lose their job. And then recruitment agencies, sometimes even employers, will have workers actually sign letters or record videos falsely stating, I have not paid fees. And for them, that can look like they're ticking a box to show that they're complying with the zero fees policies. And finally, deception. This indicator comes from, it might most commonly be thought about with regards to contract substitution, where a worker is given one job offer or contract, and then actually it's switched out when they arrive on site. By this point, it's too late for them to back out because they have so many sunk costs. They've invested so much in getting this job. There's nothing they can do. This is incentivized by a lack of due diligence over what workers are actually being promised, as well as this incentive I've discussed for recruiters to just make more and more money. It's not always just about what's better or worse in the job that they ultimately get. It's about what's different to their expectations. So to use an example, if a worker wants to work in a certain city in Malaysia because they want to be closer to family or friends who also have jobs there, if they're then sent to another city to work instead, that doesn't meet their expectations, and that might completely screw up their idea of the job that they wanted. So it's not always just about, are they earning the same money that they thought they would be? So that has been the problem. What that creates is even more fear for workers, which makes these issues as a whole hard to see and even harder to count when we're doing diagnosis and investigation. But I'm going to hand over to MJ now, who's going to discuss why it's more important than ever to act.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. So first of all, it's more important than ever to act because of what's happening to workers and their families. So we're talking about modern slaves. We're talking about very high human suffering. We are in 2024. We should not be still talking about this. We should have evolved from that. So there is the risk and the impact on people that should prompt us to act swiftly and hopefully change systems. But also the landscape for businesses has changed in a way that I consider to be absolutely seismic and not seen before. So in terms of risk management, the reputational and legal risks and commercial risks to businesses have gone up significantly. And I'll show in a minute a bit of a timeline of that change in the landscape of business and human rights. In terms of meeting customers' expectations, again, like we keep seeing exposés in the media and different type of protest in relation with how businesses are performing in terms of human rights, particularly recently in terms of child labor. In terms of business benefits, we have data to share with you in terms of concrete business benefits that we've been able to measure in terms of productivity, lower staff turnover, lower absenteeism, satisfaction, etc. And there are some businesses who are quite seeing how working better with suppliers and workers in the supply chain is bringing quite concrete business benefits. But if I want to point out to the biggest changes in the landscape are the regulatory changes, which we're going to see in a minute. So hopefully at the end of this webinar, you will get our message and a little bit what it leads and guides all the work we do at Impact, which is that what is good for workers is better for business. So let's quickly flash some newspaper headlines to remind ourselves of how these issues continue to be front of mind and continues to grab attention and continues to generate situations of crisis that could have been avoided with better due diligence in advance. And let's go to the next slide to see a little bit what has been the changes in the regulatory landscape. So there has been a really dramatic move from soft law to hard law, to businesses acting because we want to, because it's the right thing to do, to because we have to. And on the top part, you see all the guidance and soft law, which has been very influential for sure, and very useful to clarify what is the expectation on businesses. But the hard regulation, it's really transformational, particularly in the last year and a half, I would say. So there is a lot of domestic regulation in terms of modern slavery coming on markets across the globe. We also see much more activity in the US on the back of the Tariff Act, which is a 1930 act, so quite old, but since 2018, there is increased number of cases, and these are the withhold release orders that Ben mentioned before, which means that as a business, because of this ban on exporting products made with forced labor into the US, you may wake up one morning and find you just cannot export to one of your biggest markets. But in Europe, if you think that in 2023, the European Union passed CSRD, which is the reporting directive, but also CSDDD, which is the due diligence directive that require businesses to identify, prevent, and mitigate impact potential or existing impacts on environment and human rights. And it creates responsibility for directors of those companies. That's a real game changer in terms of the risks businesses are facing if not addressing these risks and impacts in their supply chains and in their own operations. And we are still to see what's going to be the impact of the EU forced labor ban, because it really gives teeth to all the other regulation. And if it's anything similar to the US one, it's going to be quite transformational. So as you can see, whether it is impact on people, impact on businesses, it has really evolved the landscape of business and human rights. So it's a really good timing to keep discussing these issues with you. So we cover why things keep going wrong. We're covering the evolving landscape of business and human rights. So let's now go into what can we practically do. So back to you, Ben.
Great, thank you, MJ. And just a reminder, please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. We'll get to these at the end. We can also have some live questions. We're going to try and leave about 15 to 20 minutes at least for questions just after Derba speaks following this final section. So practical steps to responsible recruitment. These are going to broadly follow the OECD due diligence guideline. Excuse me. So some of the wording might be familiar to you in that respect, but these practical steps are born out of practical use of this support and this strategy and this capacity building that we've provided to a number of companies, particularly in the Malaysian context. But they apply nonetheless all around the world. So firstly, embedding responsible business conduct in this context means commitment to the employer pays principle, commitment to the ILO definition of recruitment fees and related costs, as well as to deeper engagement in labour source countries. This cannot be completely outsourced. Ensuring open tender invitations, which are accessible to all legitimate agencies, including a reapplication by any recruitment agencies that you're already working with. That's a very important part. And information sharing events on what this tender process might look like to hire new recruitment agencies, as well as expectations of the agencies in advance of that tender. Secondly, we'll want to identify and assess any potential impacts within each tender. So what could be going wrong in those particular recruitment journeys or in those particular recruitment channels that each agency that can be highlighted in each agency's tender. So what we'd want to see is what kind of policies, procedures, and commitments they have. That's a small part of it. What is actually a bigger part of it is their itemized breakdowns of costs. So what are they saying that each element of their own recruitment channel is going to cost per worker? So that should include whatever is necessary in that country context. So it might be security clearance, it might be visas, it might be medical checks in home country, as well as medical checks in destination country. How much are they charging for each of these costs, as well as a transparent breakdown of what their actual admin fee or their profit margin is. If you've got all of these things and they seem legitimate, then that could tell you that this is a legitimate application. And once you're able to compare multiple tenders side by side, you'll start to get a sense of what does look realistic, what doesn't. Very often in the past, we've seen recruitment agencies that charge far too low, and guess where they're getting the money from? Directly from the workers. So therefore, we want to be seeing a realistic breakdown of all of these elements. A question we often get is, how do we know that it's a realistic breakdown of all recruitment elements? There's a number of ways we can check. One of them is by having this open tender. So you're comparing, 5, 10, 20 different tenders all side by side to compare them with each other and start to get a sense of what's real. We can get some information from embassies, governments, etc., but not always. there's also more and more benchmarking reports on particular recruitment corridors as well. So I've got some of them up on screen. There's some Impact Public reports on recruitment corridors into Qatar, which are very similar to the Middle East in general. The Veritas recruitment cost calculator. There's the 5 Corridors project. We're also working with a new group of colleagues on a 10 corridors project, looking at 10 particular recruitment corridors. And there's other ILO benchmarking studies as well, such as the one on screen with Australian Aid to do with Thailand. Next up, communication and collaboration. So it's really important to use this information and speak to buyers, other stakeholders about what will be the new true cost of recruitment. What does this mean for price implications in this supply chain? Perhaps buyers will have to pay a little bit more to make sure that recruitment is actually done ethically, because before, recruitment was very much funded by workers. So there needs to be conversations and agreement about cost sharing for all people, for all entities involved. This also includes between peers as well, so between buyers. So at an industry level, we can sign memorandums of understanding. We can endorse various agreements. What I've got on screen is the example of the Consumer Goods Forum and AIM Progress, who have adopted and endorsed the impact principles and guidelines to repayment of migrant worker recruitment fees. So doing this as a whole, as a coalition, has then a unified approach and has something to point to, so that no one is getting left behind by continuing. No one is kind of getting ahead by continuing to act unethically. In Malaysia as well, there was something set up called the Responsible Glove Alliance, which the intention of which was to do something like this as well, whereby there was agreement around how to go about zero fees at a kind of industry level, again, with the intention that there would be equal transparency and equal approaches taken towards repayment in the same regard, with the intention that no one would benefit from continuing to act unethically. Next up, we're going to talk about tracking implementation and cooperating in corrective action plans for the agencies that are shortlisted. So we can follow the OECD due diligence guidelines to conduct agency due diligence, do some management interviews, some worker and some candidate interviews of candidates who are currently being recruited through the recruitment agencies, can provide some mentoring and capacity building, and then require some updates to standard operating procedures, signed agreements and commitments, in particular assigning responsibilities, making sure there are people at the recruitment agencies who are clearly responsible for changing the way they do things. Then once we've got those shortlisted and once we see good progress and we're happy with it, then we can sign service level agreements with the agencies, which should include strict clauses. So the strict clauses can be on things around providing awareness sessions on what the recruitment process and working in living conditions looks like, so the candidates are fully aware of this. We've seen good examples of pamphlets being created that are handed to every candidate during recruitment, so everything is completely black and white as to what they'll be experiencing. It even has photos of the accommodation they'll be living in, so it's very verifiable. The requirement to ensure that there's an awareness of a confidential grievance mechanism, as well as actually providing that grievance mechanism often through the buyer or somewhere else in the supply chain, but requiring that recruitment agent to actually give that information to the worker, as well as conducting due diligence when you speak to candidates and speak to workers after they've started their job, where you say, were you aware of a confidential grievance mechanism during your recruitment? Were you aware that you could call it at any time? And, is this genuine? Is the worker actually just saying yes, yes, yes to everything because they've been coerced or coached? Or actually was there free and fair information during this whole recruitment process? And then finally, having a process for continuous improvement to see that you've got good recruitment agents. You really want them to agree to and be committed to and genuinely take part in lessons learned and continuous improvement of the whole process. I'm now going to hand over to our guest speaker, Derba, to say a few words, particularly on monitoring and grievance mechanisms.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. Good evening from Kathmandu. I'm so glad to talk about some of the challenges that the responsible employer and the responsible recruiters should be aware of when they're recruiting the migrant workers from countries like Nepal, Indonesia, Bangladesh, in this region. So the ratio of responsible recruitment is still low, but there has been partial improvement since COVID. Companies are also required to be aware of additional issues like medical test. When they invest the money in the zero fees recruitment, they need to be aware about the medical test, visa arrangement, where they're arranging the visas, where they are arranging the flight from, quality of the meal and accommodation to the candidates during the recruitment process. Because sometimes workers don't get everything that they are supposed to get during the recruitment process. Companies need to be provide technical and financial support to their recruitment partners as well on time for the agencies to sustain in the ethical recruitment practices. For example, when a recruitment agency in Nepal receives a job order to recruit workers from a company in Malaysia, they often do not receive any advance payment to initiate the recruitment process. The agency is also not allowed to charge the workers for those costs. So they must invest upfront in expenses such as sourcing candidates, medical, insurance, food, transportation, accommodation, as well as flight tickets sometimes. So this often required agency to take a loan to manage the cash flow. Many agencies reports that the companies take several months to reimburse these costs upon deployment of workers, which leads them to pay high interest to the bank. This means that when the fund finally arrive, most of the profit is used to pay the interest because of the delay. Additionally, the service fee that the ethical recruitment agencies receive are usually low compared to the effort required for the ethical recruitment practices, which can be quite extensive. Some companies choose to work with low-cost agencies without considering the potential risks, leading to the range of other issues. Additionally, the embassies of source countries should ensure responsible recruitment by conducting proper due diligence as well before they approving the recruitment quota to recruit the workers from their country. For example, like Nepal and Malaysia have a G2G zero cost recruitment agreement, which has now expired, and I don't think it's renewed yet. But the embassies should require, they should check about the proof of payment to the recruitment agency in Nepal. They should inspect the demand. Sorry, they should inspect the accommodation. They should review the pay slips of existing workers. They should interview the existing workers before they approve the demand. So what we found is that there is no government mechanism to verify whether the employer company has made the required payment to the recruitment agency in Nepal to recruit workers with zero fees practice. Only there is the policy, but there is no mechanism to verify if recruitment agency indeed getting the payment from the companies to do the zero fees recruitment. Okay, so in the end, I would like to quickly talk about Migration Drishti. Our organization, we are a team of former migrant workers. Our goal is to integrate migrant workers into fair and responsible recruitment process through our independent third-party monitoring and verification mechanism in the sourcing countries. Third-party monitoring and verification are essential. To ensure accuracy and reliability of the responsible recruitment process. As I mentioned earlier, there are still several risks, even after companies having policies in place. It's important to build trust with workers and gain their confidence. So Migration Drishti conduct investigation and counseling session with the workers at different stages of the recruitment and employment. We speak their mother tongue and ensure there is no risk for them to speak up. We try to protect them. We verify the workers deployed without any dead bondage. We ensure a fair and transparent recruitment and selection process under the direct observation of worker-centric mechanism. We ensure workers understand the terms and conditions of the job before they sign off the employment contract. We provide third-party grievance channel during the recruitment process to enable candidates to raise their concern voluntarily. We also meet them at their company, not always, but in some cases that we meet the workers upon their arrival after in the destination countries to check their situation and also get the feedback. So since Migration Drishti established in 2021, we have directly overseen the recruitment of over 15,000 migrant workers, primarily in Nepal, as well as in Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh. We have made sure that no recruitment fee are paid by the workers, that terms and conditions are very clearly communicated before departure, and we have successfully resolved more than 100 sensitive grievances related to the recruitment process.
Excellent. Turba, thank you. I'm going to stop you there just because we have a lot of questions and some questions we want to ask you, but thank you for sharing all the work you guys do, and also for sharing some of the very concrete risks you identify from your daily work, because you are very, very close to the workers and what's happening on the ground.